This lesson will convey background information on what cybersecurity is and help to establish a foundation for the rest of the course by providing a baseline of industry concepts and an overview of what cybersecurity means for business. Since this whole course revolves around cybersecurity, it makes sense to take a moment to discuss what cybersecurity is and provide a brief history lesson. To start with, you should know that cybersecurity goes by many different names, and the name most often heard really depends on the sector you worked in. An example would be the government sector, where the terminology cybersecurity is prevalent. In the private sector, information security is prevalent. As you can see, there are plenty of choices that can be used to describe the way an organization or agency goes about protecting information, networks, assets, resources, and electronic data. With the exception of information security, each of these terms is not necessarily synonymous or interchangeable,
and the name most often heard really depends on the sector you work in. An example would be the government sector, where the terminology cybersecurity is prevalent.
And information
in the private sector, information security is prevalent.
What you should know,
as you can see, there are plenty of choices that can be used to describe the way an organization or agency goes about protecting information, networks, assets, resources, and electronic data. With the exception of information security, each of these terms is not necessarily synonymous or names, and the name most often heard really depends on the sector you work in. An example would be the government sector, where the terminology cybersecurity is prevalent. In the private sector, information security is prevalent. What you should know, as you can see, there are plenty of choices that can be used to describe the way an organization or agency goes about protecting information, networks, assets, resources, and electronic data. With the exception of information security, each of these terms is not necessarily goes by many different names, and the name most often heard really depends on the sector or area of focus. An example would be the government sector, where the terminology cybersecurity is prevalent. In the private sector, information security is what you should know. As you can see, there are plenty of choices that can be used to describe the way an organization or agency goes about protecting information, networks, assets, resources, and electronic data. With the exception of information security,
there is the code base, the language that the website is written in. There are servers hosting the website, each running an operating system and applicable software packages. Then there's the underlying network providing the connectivity and encryption medium. There's also a data center or hosting provider with a location and employees with access to the facilities and running background checks and vendor management and security cameras and all the documentation and processes to ensure compliance and evidence of due diligence. And the list goes on. This is cybersecurity. All of this. It's a vast field, and what it comes down to is protecting information, protecting humans, ensuring hardware and software is stable, and ensuring the integrity and confidentiality of data. Let's move on to a brief history lesson, and throughout this lesson, let's keep in mind that information security is not a new trend by any means. We speak of information security in terms of computers, but humans have been devising ways to secure information since the days of early civilization, where Julius Caesar used a simple substitution cipher that we now call a Caesar cipher. Jump forward a couple of thousand years, and we are doing the same thing with more complex algorithms. The goals remain similar. Try and create a system that is hard to break. Enter hackers and crackers. There is a reason why bank vaults and personal safes have their strength rated in time. This is because no system is impenetrable. It comes down to how much time and effort one is willing to put into the endeavor. Create a strong safe, and someone else creates more powerful acid, stronger explosive, longer drill bit, or smarter way to gain access, and this is the same in InfoSec. An advanced persistent threat, also known as an APT, is a buzzword, yes, and it portrays the reality of security in our time, with over 3 billion internet users, 1 billion websites, and over 9 billion connected devices. Suffice it to say that there is a large attack surface, and there are always malicious actors willing to take advantage of weak security implementations. Hackers. The original hacker was a good guy, a tinkerer that wanted to learn and discover new information. If you ever get a chance to hear me present a topic, kind of like now, you might notice that I rarely ever use the word hacker. The media, the layperson's ignorance, and the general lack of education around InfoSec has turned a term of respect and cunning or admiration of skill into a negative connotation in the realm of information security. I won't belabor the point, but now you have a little background on this term. A more appropriate word or phrase would be attacker, malicious actor, or threat actor. We are just getting started, Next, we will discuss the importance of cybersecurity and how to protect yourself and your company. But before we do, here's a question to think about. Protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of computer systems is a critical component of all cybersecurity programs. Humans, as well as hardware and software, all play a key role in securing assets and information. Why do you think businesses, both large and small, tend to have cybersecurity departments? The importance of cybersecurity can be seen on a daily basis, from opening a browser and conducting online banking transactions, to visiting the doctor where your healthcare information needs to be protected, and even listening to the news and hearing about the latest breach in security. This lesson focuses on the importance of cybersecurity as it pertains to national security, headlines, employment, the workplace, and you. The topics for this module are the relevance of cybersecurity, background on the industry, and to complement the background on InfoSec from last module, we will delve into security in the workplace. And lastly, how InfoSec impacts you and your company. Obviously, information security is a very relevant topic, hence me talking about it and your enjoyable involvement as well. Let's jump right into negative unemployment and what that means. When there is negative unemployment in a certain industry, there are not enough qualified individuals to fill all of the open positions, not just in one geographic location, but across the industry in general. Cybersecurity is experiencing negative unemployment and has been for several years. Given the depth of career options and the technical level of expertise required to be an appealing candidate, this is not surprising. Couple that with the sheer number of companies that require an InfoSec presence, and there's a perfect storm for attackers. Targets have opportunity galore, and no one watching the henhouse, so to speak. This is one reason why breaches are so common and often in the news. There are just so many ways to compromise a business and too few qualified professionals to go around, which in turn has an impact on national security. This shortage of professionals is felt by the NSA and FBI as much as it is in the private sector. Because of all of this, there is a marked shift in education to focus more on computer science, with a focus in security. And the more that security events make headlines, the more people seem to become fixated on the industry and need for information security. More and more companies are focusing on security. Unfortunately, it seems to be after a major breach for some of them. This is partly the reason for the negative unemployment. Organizations across the spectrum are realizing that they can and will become the target of an attack, when historically, security had nothing to do with their business model. The ubiquity of the web and the general ease of launching an application means there's a low threshold for businesses to enter the market. With that low threshold often comes lax security or a general lack of understanding about all the elements involved in securing an app, a business, or even a brand reputation. This reality has given rise to the Band-Aid approach, which is essentially a quick fix mentality when dealing with security issues. For example, a sales and marketing department may communicate that a website is required to help with their duties. So a WordPress site might be quickly put up after a domain name is registered. Then comes the defaced website and a conference call asking what went wrong. Well, there was no process in place to set minimum password requirements, or knowledge of WordPress plugins that could be used to enhance security, or adequate logging and vendor management conversations, and the list goes on. And then it happens. A realization that a security hire might be warranted to help get a grip on these things. This is adding security after the fact, instead of creating a program that incorporates security personnel from the planning phases. And it's an approach that many organizations take. For many organizations, this makes sense. Without sales and revenue coming in, there is no business. So there's an inherent risk of sustainability in spending money on a cost center instead of on a revenue-generating team. This is one of the several reasons why you are an important asset in fighting against common threats. I was speaking with a friend recently, and she mentioned that her Facebook account was quote-unquote hacked. I replied, "So you mean that you had a weak password on your account?" The answer was yes. And this highlights the limitations a company has when it comes to their security program. It's challenging to prevent users from making serious mistakes that can compromise the security of their own account. And this speaks to a much larger topic of the balance between security and convenience, which by itself could probably be expanded to encompass a whole course. What you need to keep in mind as a user of a system, whether personally or within your company, is that the security of your account, or even the business to a certain extent, really is incumbent upon you making smart choices. It's imperative that there are guidelines and proper documentation in place, and you have the opportunity to make smart choices, like using an encrypted channel when accessing corporate email, but there are other less obvious choices to make which oftentimes stand between business as usual and recovering from a breach. Ask yourself what precautions you take to keep your information secure. Do you reuse the same password? Have you configured multi-factor authentication for any of your accounts? Do you make a habit of installing updates on your computer and mobile devices? Seemingly simple questions, but the outcomes of neglecting even these basic security controls can have serious consequences. The objectives of this course are to help you become better versed in basic cybersecurity concepts and terminology. The way this is accomplished is by introducing you to new topics while providing background information on each topic and challenging you to expand your understanding of this new information by using it. The goal is to ensure that you are able to use keywords in an effective manner and understand how poor security practices have an impact on you personally as well as how they impact companies. As the title of this course states, the purpose is to learn new vocabulary. This vocabulary will be specific to cybersecurity and will be presented within that context. Along with the actual vocabulary, you will be exposed to scenarios in the professional world where this vocabulary comes into play. You will learn how poor security practices lead to poor security outcomes via a sample scenario and throughout the course material. You will also learn how to effectively use this new vocabulary in a way that makes sense to you. Part of learning anything new is being confident with the information, such that, in this context, you can hold a conversation with an executive, and even if security is not part of your daily duties, you should still be able to understand what technical professionals are conveying in their daily communications. Chances are that this is relevant whether your role is in the front office, back office, client-facing, or you just want to increase your understanding of cybersecurity as part of your personal life. Some of the words, phrases, and concepts discussed in this course have entire books dedicated to them, and whole industries have been created to service what they stand for. Like anything in life, you get out what you put in. Take these new words and concepts and push yourself to use them in everyday conversations. Delve into them and master them. Take, for instance, a database. Lots of people hear the word and automatically think of it as a way to store data. Some people make the connection that data goes into a database and can be retrieved. A much smaller subset of people have actually created a database, established connection strings, written queries, optimized tables, deduplicated records, added encryption at rest, or understand the differences between MySQL and NoSQL, for example. The point being that, as you are introduced to this new world of information, it is incumbent upon you to use the knowledge and expand upon it in a way that enriches the experience and provides the best results for yourself. Another area that you will be exposed to is poor security practices. It's easy to point out what went wrong after the fact, and as they say, hindsight is 20/20. There's often much that can be learned from making mistakes, however. This is why throughout the course we will also talk about some of the shortcomings of security programs. You'll learn about common mistakes, what it takes to create a great security program, and why we as security professionals do what we do. We will discuss a specific case study that will focus on phishing, as it is one of the more effective ways that cybercriminals infiltrate an organization. Phishing is challenging to stop. It can be difficult to identify for some people, and the impact as well as consequences can be serious. The goal of this course is to introduce new vocabulary, but it is also the goal to educate. I believe that in order to learn this new information, it is advantageous to have background information on the concepts being discussed. This is why the course is set up to provide that information in addition to communicating the vocabulary, like a combination of new words and applicable context. As previously mentioned, the next module is going to focus on a phishing case study. Phishing is a common occurrence both at home and in the workplace. Have you ever been a victim of a phishing scam? Ask yourself what made you open the email and why the attack was successful. Challenge yourself to become better at spotting malicious emails. In this lesson, we will tackle a very common type of attack called phishing. By focusing on the wording of the phishing email, we can start to gain a better understanding of how a typical attack works and why it is often successful. Keep in mind that phishing attacks target humans and our weaknesses, but often rely on weaknesses in a cybersecurity program to be effective and remain undetected. I mentioned the effectiveness of phishing from an attacker's perspective, and this is often the case for several reasons. In my experience, there's always a percentage of people that will fall victim to phishing emails, typically due to poor education, well-crafted emails, bad filtering, and other reasons as well. Part of an effective cybersecurity program actually involves testing for these reasons, as in engaging in mock phishing campaigns with the intent of getting people to fall for them. It sounds malicious, but of course, when conducted in a professional manner, the emails are benign, and the goal is to educate and metrics-based. Statistics are gathered, click rates are calculated, effective campaigns are studied, and recommendations are created based on the results. Security professionals know that nothing is 100% secure. People will click on the links, malware will be downloaded, sometimes executed, and machines will become infected. A robust phishing program tries to take into account all the possible outcomes and plan accordingly. So let's get into it. We are going to look at a phishing email and focus on the verbiage used, then break it down and explain what exactly is happening. This is the email. Hello, Kathy. Your Visa credit card has been deactivated due to suspicious account activity. Please visit www.visa.deactivate.info to re-enable your card and avoid fees. Sincerely, the Visa team. Now let's do a quick aside and look straight at the link, which is in a different color than the rest of the text. What is the domain? Is it Visa? Does it have anything to do with Visa? No. One must look at the link from right to left and understand that the first dot and the two strings to its left and right, in this case, deactivate.info, comprise the domain name. Moving farther to the left, there is a .visa, which is a host or subdomain, and even farther to the left is www, which is another host. So the actual domain is deactivate.info, which is bogus. It has not been registered and is only being used for example purposes. Some people see www.visa and think that it's a legitimate site because they don't understand the structure of domain names. Do you notice any typos? And would you expect to? Today's phishing emails are much different than phishing emails from the past. Often the verbiage is very professional, but that depends on the authors, the intent, and the type of phishing attack. Intent can range from getting the victim to browse to a site, to getting the victim to input credentials, to wanting the victim to open an attached file. It all depends on what the creators are trying to accomplish. You might be surprised how many people will click on that link. So what is the intent, and why would the attackers want someone to click on the link? To answer those questions, we would have to research the email a bit more. Look at the headers, check if there is an attachment, and research the WHOIS record. Let's focus on the WHOIS record for a moment. WHOIS records are records that are associated with the domain or IP address of a website or network, respectively. The record contains information such as when the domain or network was first registered, who the points of contact are for the domain, and oftentimes it even provides a means to contact the owners of the domain or network. Now think about phishing more generally speaking. If phishing is so prevalent and so many people fall victim to these type of attacks, how come we just don't stop it from happening? What do you think it would take to stop phishing attacks from being successful? Many different industries have similar goals when it comes to cybersecurity. Protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems and information is a critical component to any cybersecurity program. In this lesson, we talk about which industries are the biggest target of attacks and how to coordinate defenses. Industries include anything from agriculture and finance to government, retail, and healthcare. Each one has information to protect and the means by which its cybersecurity goals are accomplished. But which industries are the biggest targets of attacks, and why? This module will discuss these topics as well as how defenses can be coordinated and increasingly are among different organizations and across industry boundaries. Every company has something to protect, like the intellectual property of Coca-Cola's secret formula, the Google search engine algorithm, blueprints for the Pentagon, schematics on the latest aircraft carrier, political emails, planned mergers and acquisitions, customer records, banking information, etc. And in today's world, this information is stored electronically. Sensitive information is also stored electronically, usually by design, to decrease the amount of effort required to access it, as well as to make it accessible quickly, and even to aid in the information security process. So which organizations are targeted if every organization has sensitive information? The answer is all of them. One of the easiest ways to see this is by viewing externally facing server logs. What is an externally facing server? Simply put, it's a web server located on the internet. The amount of indiscriminate scanning, the frequency of probing, and the sheer source and volume of traffic is astounding. Automated attacks are the norm, and these consist of a bot. A bot is a specifically written program with the purpose of exploiting vulnerabilities or leveraging known weaknesses. And these bots constantly probe websites and networks looking for open ports, weak configurations, default passwords, and the like. When a weakness is discovered, a bot can take the next logical step and capitalize on the weakness, either gaining access to a Twitter account, establishing SSH access, or even harvesting email addresses to later send phishing attacks to. Bots may be purposefully written, but they are indiscriminate to an extent, and most of these events, when unsuccessful, are just normal background noise to the ears of professionals, since these type of attacks happen all the time. Everyone is a target. How easy is it to compromise your network? How much effort is it worth, and how much motivation does the attacker have? These are the fundamental questions that have to be answered. And since everyone is being attacked constantly, we are slowly shifting to a culture where it makes more sense to share information amongst organizations to increase threat intelligence. This is sometimes seen in the form of private enterprises sending information on known attacks to the government. Other times, government contractors are fed threat intelligence directly from a government department and are expected to actively mitigate the known threats as part of doing business and maintaining that contract. Regardless of how it is set up, the outcome ideally would be to coordinate in such a way that malicious actors are at a disadvantage. This has been seen in the past, but from the opposite perspective, where malicious organizations would actually work together to compromise a target. Now we see that companies are thinking in the same way as it relates to sharing information that can help to protect themselves from attacks. Although this is a newer trend, it is not widely supported, nor does it have great uptake in the community. Do you think sharing information with other businesses in this manner is a logical way to combat attackers? Humans are certainly a weak link when it comes to cybersecurity, but there are many links in the chain, so to speak. This lesson will discuss the roles that humans play in cybersecurity, break down the thought and reasoning behind the phrase, security is everyone's responsibility, and talk about securing the human. People play an important role in cybersecurity, but what is that role, and why are humans often referred to as the weakest link? We often hear that security is everyone's responsibility. Is this true? And how do we go about securing the human element of a cybersecurity program? Let's start by discussing the roles that individuals have in cybersecurity. At this point, we should have an understanding that there are many facets to cybersecurity and building an effective program. People can be trained to write secure code, just as there are technology companies that specialize in creating software related to security, like antivirus and application whitelisting solutions. One of the most important tasks in creating a security program at an enterprise level is something that humans are well suited to do, and that is to find what is most valuable to the organization. This can be challenging, but it is certainly one of the most important steps, as it dictates what level of security is sufficient, how much money should be spent on securing the critical infrastructure, and it helps dictate what the goals of the program should be. We talked about negative unemployment, and this is especially true in the cybersecurity field. This creates problems for companies seeking to enhance their security department and increase the overall security of the company and its assets. This is one reason why there are so many breaches. Finding the right people to fill the positions is challenging, but there is more to it than that. Oftentimes, companies have a very immature security program, or none at all. Company culture dictates what is acceptable. I have seen enterprises with no patch management system in place, others that had no regular vulnerability scanning occurring, or a lack of encryption and documentation, and executive management that was simply not equipped to understand the risk. Too often, a breach has to occur before management changes the culture to increase security, and even then, there is a calculation that has to take place. If the cost outweighs the benefits, then it doesn't make sense. Companies are in the business of making money, and many times, minimum security controls and adequate insurance are the norm. So we can come to an understanding that spending and budgets are a real concern for organizations. In the realm of information security, all professionals know that there is no such thing as 100% secure. Good managers know that there has to be a limit on expenditures when trying to strike the balance between secure enough and profitable. It comes down to due diligence and reasonable security precautions, which of course is both arbitrary and vague, but once again is the norm. When we hear that security is everyone's responsibility, this speaks to taking personal responsibility for our actions, like not letting an unknown individual tailgate in behind us, locking our workstations, or reporting suspicious activity. But if humans are the weakest link, then why is it their responsibility? Does that make sense? The reality is that there is a layered approach. Humans configure security devices to the best of their ability, automate alerts and thresholds, then research anomalies, all while performing the basic security duties mentioned moments ago. So in a way, security really is everyone's responsibility. However, this can be a problem, because when security is everyone's responsibility, it quickly becomes no one's responsibility. Running an effective cybersecurity program requires people to have the adequate knowledge required to do their jobs effectively and also serve as a line of defense. This is why at least a fundamental level of security awareness is required, and the better programs often dedicate several hours each quarter to educating employees on relevant security topics. The key is that the awareness training solution needs to be consistent in frequency, relevant to the job role and ideally the individual, as well as high quality with metrics available to measure the outcomes. And of course, this too is challenging, as most employees have little spare time for training and may lack the desire to become educated on topics outside of their area of interest. Not knowing the basics is a recipe for disaster, however, like not understanding the difference between an encrypted browser connection and an unencrypted one, or how to manage passwords effectively. For instance, if you choose a weak password for one of your accounts and someone else is able to guess it, whose fault is that? I want to leave you with some questions to think about as a challenge to you to answer from your own perspective based on your experiences. This is the first question. Is security really everyone's responsibility? What type of consequences are appropriate for a person not following the security policy at work? And should there be a technical control in place to prevent circumvention of policy? This lesson jumps into vocabulary, specifically threats, risks, vulnerabilities, and exploits. Definitions are provided as a baseline to build off of, and examples of each vocabulary word are provided as well. Relevant talking points for each word are included to help drive home the meaning and context of each one. We will be covering several new vocabulary words in this section, so let's get right to it. Threat. You can think of a threat as a potential for bad things to happen. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, defines a threat as any circumstance or event with the potential to adversely impact organizational operations, organizational assets, or individuals through an information system via unauthorized access, destruction, disclosure, modification of information, and or denial of service. Also, the potential for a threat source to successfully exploit a particular information system vulnerability. Let's look at some examples. Malware. Malware is definitely a threat, as it can cause harm to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of a system, software, and business operations in general. Even something like a loss of power would be considered a threat to cybersecurity, as the implications could impact physical security or the availability of systems. Vulnerability. According to ISACA, the Information Systems Audit and Control Association, a vulnerability is a weakness in design, implementation, operation, or internal control. There is an entire class of security tools dedicated to the identification, classification, and risk rating of vulnerabilities. Specifically for software vulnerabilities, there are scanners that will determine the current patch level of a system and produce a report showing deviations. This report will often show what vulnerabilities are present on a system, how to fix them, and attempt to calculate the overall risk represented by these vulnerabilities. Of course, this only takes into account known vulnerabilities. A 0-day is the term for a vulnerability actively being exploited for which no patch currently exists. Just like humans, vulnerability scanners don't know what they don't know. And if there is not a way to check for a certain vulnerability due to details not being public, then the scanner will have no way to identify that type of potential vulnerability. And this is the case with 0 days. Exploit, a software tool designed to take advantage of a flaw in a computer system, typically for malicious purposes, such as installing malware. Officially. When security professionals speak of exploits and exploitation, we are referring to a known way that an attacker can leverage a vulnerability to cause harm to an asset, like a system or software, and to a lesser extent even a human in the case of social engineering. There are many examples of vulnerabilities with no known exploits, meaning that just because there's a known weakness does not mean that there's an effective way to take advantage of it. Oftentimes, discovering vulnerabilities is much easier to do than crafting a working exploit that can be used against that vulnerability. Nevertheless, there is risk. ISC², which is the International Information Systems Security Certification Consortium, defines risk in the form of an equation where threat times vulnerability equals risk. This can be a useful way for management to quantify risk, which in turn can help with obtaining adequate funding for a security program. Now take a moment to think about how threats, risks, vulnerabilities, and exploits all fit together and how you would measure the impact when a vulnerability is exploited. Be sure to take into account the sensitivity of the asset being protected. From DLP, data leakage protection, to NPI, non-public information, acronyms are the norm in cybersecurity. This lesson delves into explaining many common acronyms and the typical scenarios where we are likely to encounter them. Data loss prevention is part of a robust security solution, and its primary goal is to identify, alert, and stop sensitive information from leaving the organization. An example would be social security numbers being sent via email to a recipient outside of the organization. A properly implemented DLP solution would alert on this activity and stop the email from being sent. Of course, there are always ways around this, as with any security solution, but the goal stays the same: best effort. DC and BC. A proper disaster recovery and business continuity plan often involves a backup location physically separated from the primary location where information is stored and servers and infrastructure are hosted. This can mean duplicating every piece of hardware, from firewalls and load balancers to servers, switches, and SANs, all to another data center, so that in the case of an earthquake, for instance, business continues as normal, even if the primary data center is no longer operational. With the advent of cloud computing, it can be a logical business decision to offload the risk and overhead by choosing to host all business-critical applications in the cloud. Both intrusion prevention systems and intrusion detection systems play a critical role in cybersecurity. Every mature organization that makes sensitive systems publicly available, almost without exception, has both. A properly tuned intrusion prevention system will actually thwart attacks before they even make it to a server, whereas the intrusion detection system will detect anomalous activity, generate an alert, and save a packet capture for further analysis. Ensuring these systems are properly tuned and up to date are both key elements. Transport layer security and secure sockets layer are still used interchangeably despite the differences in the actual protocols. TLS provides for transport layer encryption as well as integrity and is often used for web browsing, email, and VoIP, among many other logical applications of the technology. HTML, Hypertext Markup Language, is a markup language, not a full-fledged programming language as it stands today. HTML is updated irregularly to keep up with the demand of web application features that are slowly becoming standards, like built-in video support, without the need for insecure and outdated third-party browser plugins like Flash. HTTP, Hypertext Transport Protocol, is also updated irregularly, and just as HTML, it has done so to keep up with the feature demands required by today's applications, mainly to increase the speed of communications and ideally the security of communications as well. SSH, Secure Shell. It's often used in the Linux world, but it is available for every major operating system. This is another protocol used for secure connections to remote systems, and is a rather de facto standard, as it has been used for decades and provides a consistent way to securely administer systems. TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol / Internet Protocol. When you come across TCP/IP, it's usually in combination, just like in this example. However, there are actually two separate protocols, TCP and IP. The Internet Protocol can be thought of as a conduit over which TCP travels. The Transmission Control Protocol is responsible for, among other things, reliability, meaning that if there's an error in the communications channel between a client and a server, any number of packets will be resent until the entire communication stream makes it to its destination. This helps to ensure that something like a large file transfer will always complete successfully. IT, Information Technology. IT is commonly the main department in an organization that is responsible for all technology needs. Small companies may not have a dedicated security department, but most do have an IT help desk or some group responsible for technology needs, and this is usually under the purview of IT. In some organizations, IT is responsible for security duties, but this can lead to a conflict of interest when the same group of people uses tools to scan a system for vulnerabilities, then patch the systems, and certify that the same systems are in compliance. Ideally, a separate group would be responsible for the validation portion of this process. DOS and DDoS attacks are often the result of a botnet owner or renter unleashing the power of massive bandwidth. A bot is a compromised machine that can be instructed to send requests to a server. So many requests that the server is not able to keep up with the influx of traffic, and it ultimately becomes unresponsive to legitimate users trying to communicate with it. Mitigating these type of attacks is usually dependent on the relationship a business has with their ISP, or Internet Service Provider. PII and NPI, personally identifiable information and non-public information. They are similar ways of expressing that information is not public, or it can be used to personally identify someone. What is important to keep in mind is context. You may come across a sticky note, for example, with a 9 or 16-digit number on it, and think that there's a social security number or a credit card number, and that it's in violation of the corporate security policy, and it very well may be. But, without understanding the context, an attacker may not be able to leverage those numbers to cause harm to anyone. There are hundreds of acronyms used throughout IT and within cybersecurity. As with most disciplines, cybersecurity is a very specialized field where 10 members of the same team can all have completely different job roles. Can you think of additional acronyms that you have heard? Maybe technical speak that is specific to your industry or unique client engagement? At this point, we have covered some of the more common acronyms. Let's move on to some more specialized vocabulary. Tor, the Onion Router. Tor is a system that can be used to try and communicate anonymously over the internet. Tor can be tricky in terms of how it's classified. An analogy would be a road. Law-abiding citizens can travel down a road to drive to work, just as malicious people can use that same road to engage in mischievous acts. Tor tries to provide a way for people to communicate anonymously over the internet, which is a challenging endeavor. Some people use Tor to hide criminal activities, while others just want good privacy, and still others live in countries with oppressive governments, and the only free or safe speech they have is accomplished via Tor. We're certainly not going to go too far off the road when discussing Tor, but you should know what it is and what it can be used for. Linux Box. Windows is the most common desktop operating system. Android is very popular on smartphones, and of course Apple's operating systems are regular choices for folks as well. Linux is less known outside of some circles, and as of today, it is the most popular operating system for servers. Linux is open source as a matter of course, meaning that anyone is free to look at exactly how it works, make changes to it, and redistribute it if they choose to do so. From a security perspective, Linux is very often the go-to operating system, simply because it's free, offers great flexibility, and can be installed on older hardware platforms. Plus the fact that there are so many choices to choose from makes it a great option. PCI, Payment Card Industry. PCI is a standard backed by the PCI Council, which was created in 2006 by several financial service providers such as Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and the Japan Credit Bureau. One of the goals of PCI is to ensure that there are sufficient security guidelines in place that all organizations must follow in order to be allowed to handle credit and debit card information. PCI does a good job of defining the minimum level of security that should be met. However, many of the largest recent credit card breaches occurred at companies that were PCI compliant, such as Target, Home Depot, and UPS. Scripts and scripting. Scripts are a way to automate tasks on a computer system, and the proficiency of a system administrator can be measured by how lazy she or he is. Think about that for a moment. Well-versed and experienced system administrators create automated computer programs called scripts to perform tasks from tedious to mundane. If the tasks need to be done more than once, then there is a script to take care of it. This is an old adage that speaks to the importance of writing scripts to ensure that a human's time is spent on something that requires a human to look at it, instead of completing a repetitious task that a computer program could easily accomplish unattended. Scripts are written in many languages, such as PowerShell, Bash, Python, and Perl. The goal is to automate a task that needs to be done more than once, like patching systems. CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These three components are the basis of most all security programs on one level or another. If sensitive information cannot be made confidential, then there is a security shortcoming, and that same is true for data integrity. Availability speaks to the ability to interact with a system. If a system is not online and processing requests, then there is not anything to secure in this context. The last thing I want to leave you with this chapter is a question about Tor, and it's a simple question with the possibility of complex answers. Is the existence of Tor a good thing or a bad thing, and what would you use Tor for? Think about the audience in the room when you deliver a message, lead the meeting, or contribute to a conversation. This lesson focuses on utilizing your new vocabulary in an effective manner, so that accurate information can be conveyed regardless of the forum or audience's level of comprehension. Your audience will dictate the way you communicate your message. You may be speaking with peers where acronyms and jargon is common, but when speaking with people not familiar with this vocabulary, it's important to tailor your message so that it makes sense. Culture is key, as every organization has their own way of solving problems, creating value, and dealing with clients. When an acronym is not needed, there may be a different way to communicate exactly what a problem is. For example, if the TLS connection to the IPS is down, one could state that the connection to the intrusion prevention system is not working. Think about the message and the medium that the message is being communicated over. It's hard to judge tone in an email, and oftentimes a face-to-face meeting or phone call can be more effective than a long technical email. Focus on what information needs to be communicated and how that information pertains to risk and required action. Oftentimes, it is the role of security professionals to provide guidance and recommendations. Being clear about the risk versus rewards also needs to be taken into account in order to provide good guidance on a possible change to the environment, expenditure, training tool, or whatever the case may be. How important is it to use jargon? Challenge yourself to communicate the same information in a meeting or an email, both with and without jargon, and see which message is more meaningful to your intended audience. Commit to the message and find out if it had the expected outcome. People tend to make mistakes. It happens all the time, and when using a new vocabulary, it's going to happen to you as well. This lesson talks about some of the common pitfalls and how they can be avoided by planning properly, building confidence, and practicing. Like anything in life, you get out what you put in. This course is no different, and to be able to effectively communicate, you will need to work to become an expert, not just with the vocabulary and concepts introduced in this course, but also in your niche. Become the subject matter expert in your field and achieve that status. With this level of knowledge comes a command of vocabulary and terminology that one can only gain by working with the tools, building the processes, and interacting with the people in the industry. Lack of experience and confidence feed off of each other, but can easily be overcome by taking actions and actively working with the security tools and concepts discussed in this course. It can take years of working in a position to master it, and even at that point there are still things you will not know how to do. This is especially true in cybersecurity, due to the pace of technology and the sheer quantity of things to know. Most security professionals are in positions that require them to know a lot about a lot, because other people within the organization are not always equipped to look at things from a security perspective. This lends itself to on-the-job training that can be leveraged to gain the experience needed to build your confidence. Poor planning is another pitfall. Take the time to think of a way to put your new vocabulary into practice in a way that makes sense to you. Your approach may differ from other people's way of thinking, and it will be incumbent upon you to find the best way to convey the information you are trying to communicate. Remember that cybersecurity is complex, and this complexity can be intimidating, especially when working with other people who may know more about it than you in a given situation. Take the time to learn, plan out what your goals are, and work to achieve them. Cybersecurity is a constantly changing industry, and even with these changes, there are components that stay consistent over time. Breaches and security shortcomings are not going away anytime soon, and attempting to establish proper security teams within organizations is going to continue to be commonplace. This lesson talks about the current state of cybersecurity and what the future holds. Today, there is insecure software, just as there has been for decades. There are threats, vulnerabilities, active exploitation, and breaches occurring on a daily basis. There are also plenty of organizations trying to do the right thing from a security perspective, and it's a challenging task. With more connected devices and more people accessing the internet, the risks are going to remain high for the foreseeable future, but with a twist. As time progresses, I would expect the responsibility to shift, perhaps more to the end user, the actual person using the software or product. For instance, if a banking application offers two-factor authentication, I could see it becoming mandatory, or all the consequences of account compromise shifted to the customer if they choose not to use it. Technology breakthroughs are coming in the form of AI, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. I would expect to see something interesting coming out of that space. What? I don't know. And even with the expected changes, things will still be the same, to a certain extent. There's always going to be a struggle between those that defend systems and those that attack systems. Humans are great at devising new ways to secure something, while understanding that there will always be a way to circumvent, bypass, or completely compromise that security. In a way, it's fun, and honestly, the struggle is what makes it enjoyable for me, because it's a challenge on both sides of the fence to do the best that you can do. To pose some questions to you as takeaways, how long have you been using a password for, and do you think passwords will ever go away or fall out of favor for a different security mechanism? What would it take for people and technology to adopt this change, and could current and antiquated systems even support it? In this exercise, we will show a demonstration of several of the vocabulary words being used in conjunction, specifically Linux, scripting, SSH, HTTP, HTML, and SSL. To start with, and since I am on a Microsoft Windows operating system today, I will be using a program called PuTTY. This program enables me to initiate an SSH connection to another computer. What SSH does is provides an encrypted communications channel between two or more remote systems. The first system is my computer, and the second system in this case is a server located in a cloud computing environment, essentially somewhere on the internet. SSH requires certain information to be able to connect properly, specifically 3 pieces of information that include the IP address of the remote system, a username, and an authentication choice such as a cryptographic key or password. In this example, I will use a password. I'll start by entering the IP address of the remote system I want to connect to. I will also put in the port required to connect to the remote system. The default port is 22. Once the SSH connection has been established, it is prompting me for a password. You will notice that the password I'm providing is not being shown on the screen, as doing so would be a cause for concern from a security and privacy perspective. This is a built-in feature of the tool. If the username and password are valid, then the connection is complete, and I now have remote access to the server. From here, I can interact with the remote computer as if it were in the same room on the same local network, when in fact, it is far away in a data center. This server is a Linux box, but please do not let this text interface fool you. The Linux operating system comes in many different varieties, dozens of which have a robust graphical interface that allows people to point and click and interact with common applications like a browser, media players, and advanced software packages. In fact, most Linux desktops are quite similar to the more popular Windows and OS X platforms. I'm choosing to show you a command line interface, or CLI, as it will be advantageous to the rest of the demonstration. Remotely connecting to a machine is a straightforward task, as you've just seen. Remotely connecting to several machines and forwarding connections from one to another, however, can quickly become complicated and easily confusing when trying to determine which machine you are actually on. In certain situations, it can be advantageous to send traffic from one machine to another, and it's also important to be able to remember which machine you are currently connected to and where your traffic is being routed to. A quick gut check via checking your remote IP address can help with this. Several resources are available. One such resource is the website whatismyip.com. By browsing to this website, we can see what our remote IP address is. And even on a system lacking a graphical user interface, or a GUI, we can achieve this task more than one way. The first way is to use a tool called Lynx, which is a text-based browser. We interact with this tool by invoking it on the command line and passing it the domain we want to connect to. From the output, we can see the IP address and based on the situation at hand, we have now obtained the information we need. Now imagine that I wanted this information in a more automated fashion, or I wanted to know the current external IP addresses of all the machines I was connected to without having to manually go to each one individually and perform this task over and over. The way this would be accomplished is with a script. A script is akin to an automated solution. What we have to do is write the script once, well, and then we are free to run it as many times as we want in order to produce the results as subsequent information that we require. To do so, we will start by opening a file with a text editor and adding in commands to run, just as soon as we think about how to accomplish the task and properly plan it out. For this example, I'm choosing to use a website's service to get information that I desire. So first, I need to make an HTTP request, just like the browser did. Then save the results to a file and read or parse the file to pull out the information that I want. A built-in tool called wget will work well for this, as it makes HTTP requests and saves the resulting HTML file for us. The way we use wget is very similar to how we used links. Let's try it. I start by typing in the command and simply provide the domain I want to connect to. Based on these results, coupled with the results of the links request, I would surmise that the website in question is actively blocking wget requests. We can try to change what our tool appears to be in order to interact successfully with the site, but we want to keep something very important in mind: terms of service and acceptable use. We don't typically think of asking permission before we browse to a website, but when using scripts to interact on our behalf, we have to understand the resources being used. Scripts automate tasks and can easily cause a burden for website administrators when used inappropriately or excessively. One request to determine what our IP address is certainly within reason. Executing the same script thousands of times per minute, however, is abusive, impolite, and would have consequences. Think before you type. With that, let's look more like a standard browser and complete the request. These results were successful, with a redirect to the HTTPS version of the site, meaning the site is being served over SSL or TLS and our communications were encrypted.